Well, still no official word on a potential next manager, a potential next president of baseball operations, but there's still lots of scuttlebutt gossip to talk about with Andy Martino, but it's more less speculation and more actual information.
That's right.
As Andy eats popcorn and string cheese. We'll get into that in a second. Shea Anything Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's Doug Williams and Andy Martino with you this week. A reminder to subscribe to this podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening, you can find it, and we appreciate it. Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. You can check out Baseball Night in New York on SNY, the actual TV station, weeknights, 6 o'clock. You can see both of us on there. Also, we're going to be once a week moving forward now that we've reached the offseason instead of the consistent Monday, Thursday. However, if news breaks, we'll be there for you. We'll do a special edition episode if it calls for it. So just, don't unsubscribe or do anything crazy or rash. We'll still be here supporting you and your Mets needs all offseason, just for the most part, once a week. So Andy was doing Andy's a routine nutritionist recommended snacker. So
Yep.
not a fan of big meals, but today's snack right before the show was popcorn and string cheese
and grapes.
But he ate the string cheese like an adult. He didn't take his time with it.
No, I didn't de-string the cheese. That's true.
No. I like doing. That's how I prefer to eat string cheese.
Stringing it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I like to just bite into it. I think it tastes good. You know what else I like to do is take it sometimes and get a lighter and pretend I'm lighting a cigar. My family thinks that's funny.
Okay. Well, they're enabling your
That's true.
Your dad humor, clearly.
True.
So, Andy, we don't have technically any big time updates. In our last episode, the coaching staff announcement was made. Well, not announcement. You broke the news in the middle of the podcast. So we'll get into the coaching staff. Yeah.
Well, you were recording it?
Uh-huh.
How exciting.
We'll get into the coaching staff stuff in a second. But let's get presidential. We're going to throw out the obvious names and see where things stand. So also last week was the Theo Epstein news that you also were the first to report.
Oh, yeah.
That he and Steve Cohen had a conversation and it wasn't a fit. Do you think that from your read on the situation that it was obviously never a fit, but they felt like they had to do their due diligence to say to their fan base, hey, we asked and he doesn't want to do it?
That's exactly right. Have the meeting. Someone like me finds out about the meeting. Case closed. It was never going to be a thing. I mean, the only thing that made this a thing was that there were like 6 columns from respected baseball writers saying that Theo Epstein's the solution for the Mets. So people started to think, boy, there must be something to this. But there never was.
Well, that makes it pretty simple. I think it was all along kind of a messy fit. And because of a point that you've made on the show, it's kind of the not coaching tree, but underneath Theo came Jared Porter and Zach Scott. And, Zach Scott's in some legal trouble at the moment. Jared Porter is out of the game completely due to his own actions. And, you've made the point before too, that the Mets had high hopes for Jared Porter as a guy who could kind of branch from the analytics to the scouting and kind of like make sure that everybody had a voice because he had a background kind of in both and merging the two. So clearly Sandy and his disappointment about that, it would have made for another press conference with tough questions to answer, like it would have been, don't you think that they had hired Theo Epstein, it would have been like, Sandy, did you give any thought to the fact that.
Yeah.
And I can see why you want to avoid that. I mean, it's just been a turbulent year or so. Okay. The next name, David Stearns, his Brewers are playing today. Again, they can't talk to him yet. Is there any way for your reporting to progress while we're kind of in a holding pattern there?
I hear that there may be some interest on Stearns' side, but there's incredible skepticism in the industry that the owner of the Brewers, Mark Adnazio, would allow him to interview with 1 year remaining on his contract. Adnazio apparently loves him, wants to keep him, has him, so he doesn't have to do anything as far as granting permission. So the Mets are going to give it a shot, but it sounds unlikely. Another option would be, if they really want David Stearns, to wait a year and hire someone in a year. But then they would have to deal with the perception that they once again didn't get someone this time around. That shouldn't be the ultimate concern, obviously. It concerns what's best for your organization, but they could wait a year.
It'd be best, honestly, for that perception problem to be totally transparent. I know they would never do that, but like, hey, we're going to wait for David Stearns' contract to go up. Like, he is going to be the Mets president of baseball operations in a year. We're just going to wait for his deal. And there's no way that he can, this sounds like a stupid question maybe, but like, there's no way that he could just breach his contract and the Mets could say, well, we'll handle it.
No, because then the Mets would have a tampering charge on their hand. If you don't get permission, you can't. I mean, literally, Sandy Alderson can't text Billy Beane right now. Close colleagues, know each other extremely well for 30 some years, for 25 to 30 years. And if there's ever a tampering investigation, they confiscate phones. MLB does. So if Sandy texts Billy Beane like, hey man, off grid, but like, are you interested at all, or should we just move on? Just tell me. Then that message could be seen by MLB's investigations department if the A's owner wanted to pursue it. So you can't do anything.
So what if you say, hey, Billy, like, can we go to Earth Cafe in Los Angeles next week? And then you talk about it in person.
There's nothing preventing people from having contact with each other if it's not about a job, but you have to be careful. Then they're seen, and there's photos taken, and TMZ Sports is taking a photo of the Brad Pitt guy meeting with an older guy, and it's like, who's that? And then they figure it out, and they're like, oh, tampering. I mean, seriously, they could. Like, if they happen to find themselves at the same wedding or something this weekend, that'd be very convenient, but they have to be careful.
Feels like ways around it. So as for Billy Beane, it sounds like even though his team's not in the postseason, it's still difficult for you to learn any new information if Sandy Alderson can't speak to him, right? Is there anything new there?
But they're not going to ask permission until probably they can ask permission on Stearns too. Because it's a delicate situation for both of them in that once Billy Beane throws himself in the mix, or David Stearns, they have to get the job because they have jobs, right? They have to has to be like, this has really got a lot of momentum behind it. So you don't want to interview Beane tomorrow and then leave him hanging for 2 weeks while the Brewers keep playing. So they're trying to be the process somewhat streamlined that way. That's what I am told.
So if you reach a point where you can speak to them both, how do you maneuver that? Because you don't want to keep either one waiting.
I think it'll be real quiet at that point. I don't think we're going to get the kind of executive search like we had last year, where it's like this interview, then this interview, then this interview, and we kind of know about it. I think it's going to be like, get permission on those guys, try their best to speak to them secretly, get a vibe and being like, all right, which lane are we going to pursue here? If they can even get permission to speak to Stearns. And there's some other guys too. There's a guy at the Dodgers, Brandon Gomes, who they've talked about, who's the assistant GM of the Dodgers. Josh Burns has been mentioned internally a little bit. So it's not just these few people, but the permissions would all happen kind of simultaneously.
But in terms of like where we are now and where we were a couple weeks ago when, I guess we first started kind of throwing these names around, Billy Beane's no less of an option for the Mets than he was.
The Mets are, as of this hour, as far as I know, certainly as of late last week, the Mets were hopeful, though not certain, that Beane could be in play for them. That has not changed.
And what about Gomes? Why do you think that that's a person of interest for the Mets?
Dodgers. That's just sort of happens when a organization is successful. People start to get like James Click and Kyle Bloom getting GM jobs out of Tampa, or, president of baseball / GM jobs. So you look at who is in the Dodgers front office. Farhan Zaidi's already gone, thriving in San Francisco. Josh Burns has had a few jobs, and it's not certain that he would want this job. I understand he's content with what he's doing. Friedman's not going anywhere. So Brandon Gomes, let's talk to him. Kind of could work that way. And they have a guy, Ben Zosmer, who's the head of their R&D of the Mets, who came from the Dodgers already. So they might have some insight there about the inner workings of the Dodgers and who you might want to try to pick off from them.
There's got to be some people who have just kind of coincidentally found themselves in really good organizations, who like deep down know like that they're not responsible for their organization being there every year and still take the jobs. Like I'm just imagining
every coordinator that Belichick's ever had that has
correct.
been a horrible head coach.
It just, sometimes you find yourself in a position where your resume looks better than the actual quality of your work. And then you get a job that you probably don't deserve. But I've always thought like the last couple of years, poach anybody from the Rays, because kind of like Billy Beane and the A's, it's like the amount that they do every year with how little they have.
Incredible.
That's the type of organization that would intrigue me in terms of hiring some sort of executive, whereas like the Dodgers, I mean, they have the money to sign Mookie Betts. Yes, they're incredibly impressive as an organization, but I know
what you're saying. I wonder if that Mookie Betts deal is going to end up being bad and the Red Sox are going to look good on that. It's already breaking down.
I feel like the Red Sox kind of in some ways already do look good, because the idea of trading him was crushed by so many, like imagine doing that, like typical, Twitter skeptics. But, they're already in the postseason. They got Alex Verdugo, who, offensively is a pretty good player, and prospect haul as well. And, look at Andy, look at the Yankees. They have the same decision with Aaron Judge that the Red Sox had with Betts.
Yeah.
And I think you can make a point that trading that guy doesn't necessarily mean like black and white, like rebuild, giving up.
Yeah.
It can sometimes just be a business decision, and you still want to win baseball games. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, look at the Giants. You don't have to tank. There's a lot of different ways to start a winning phase.
And the Giants are another reminder that like an old position player core doesn't mean like start over.
Right.
Because guys can still play to the back of their baseball cards, even when they're in their mid 30s, which that's been part of the reason that team's been fun to watch. All right. You're listening to Shea Anything Podcast, brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G, built right for the Mets from the network. More people rely only on Verizon. Andy is sneaking in popcorn. It's like we interrupted his snack, and he's so desperate. This is the second time he's had a little bit more popcorn since we've been
everything got messed up. We're taping this at 12. I had a whole thing from about 10:45 to 11:45. I was gonna quickly Swiffer my living room. I did half of that, and then I was gonna do a quick favor for my wife, and then I was gonna have my snack and then do this with you. But I got a work call that spanned that whole hour. I accomplished nothing but half of the living room Swiffering, and didn't help my wife with the quick house thing, and had a very productive Mets-related reporting call, but was hungry when we started. And that's my story, why I'm sneaking popcorn.
And half the living room is just accumulating dust.
I know. It's uneven. It's like when you mow half the lawn.
Yeah. Now, when you say Swiffering, are you talking about like the wet Swiffer mop, or are you by hand like dusting?
I like the dry Swiffer thing. It just works better than a broom to get your wood floors clean.
Okay. So you're down on all fours, kind of like using.
No, it's on a mop type contraption.
Oh, it is on a mop. Okay.
But it's not wet.
Okay. Now that we got that out of the way, coaching staff, Andy. So first of all, I want to get into why I was confused by your reporting, but I'm sure it wasn't confusing to you, because the way these things are worded, I'm sure is normal in baseball, but maybe abnormal in normal life. So everybody that you listed, other than Jeremy Hefner, was free to seek other jobs. Does that mean that they have a job with the Mets if they don't find another one?
Good question. No, it's a courtesy. It's like, hey, most likely their contracts expire on October 31st. That's standard. So it's like, go ahead and look for another job now. October is when a lot of these jobs start to get when this is kind of the season to look for a job. We're not going to make you wait until we let you go on Halloween. Go ahead. You're out. So go ahead and look for a job. Oh, you Hefner, you over there, come back. You're not so quick. You're still
it's
here.
like, Jeremy, could you stay with us just for a second?
You're not necessarily the pitching coach, but you can't talk to anyone else.
Well, so they move on from, there's some names in there that Mets fans are familiar with. Ricky Bonas has been in the organization for a long time. There were a couple of years where he was not with the organization, and then he was
went
brought back
down to the minors for a while.
Okay. Gary DeSarcina, Hugh Quattlebaum is back to a minor league hitting instructor, I believe.
Minor league role of
Binghamton,
some kind to be determined. Did they send him to Binghamton? Did I miss that?
I'm not sure. I can't remember where.
He'll be in the minors. He's got one more year left on his deal.
So, look, just from my perspective, listening to him talk about pitchers, judging from his mound visits, the performance of some of his pitchers. I mean, I don't know how much you read into that, but Jeremy Hefner always seemed like, and you're reporting too when he got hired, always seemed like a good pitching coach. Like he was a good a good hire, somebody who was coveted by other teams. He was, normal, kind of track record in terms of the assistant pitching coach in Minnesota, becomes the pitching coach with the Mets. Why would they want somebody else in that role while clearly liking him enough to keep him with the team?
From Jeremy Hefner's mind out of your mouth, he's probably wondering the same thing because he's caught in a little bit of a middle ground. I think he is a very good pitching coach, and he's exactly the kind of pitching coach that fits in with what many organizations are looking for. If you look around the league, most pitching coaches are under 40 right now. I don't know why I said most. I should be more precise than that. Many are really young and pitched were like contemporaries of Hefner, Andrew Bailey and Caleb Cotham and some guys like that. And he would be very much in demand if they did let him speak to other organizations. I don't know if there's a big league pitching coach job available right now for him. The one in San Diego right away is one I could think of for him. But the Mets have the contract option on him. He agreed to the option. And so therefore he's under team control.
So whatever they decide with Hefner, I guess 2-part question here. And I'll start with, are they going to let, no matter who the manager is that they choose, do they care about the manager's input for his role more than the president of baseball ops, or do they need both people to talk before they?
I think in a perfect world, they're importing a manager and GM from Oakland on the same day. So that would help. I don't know if that's going to happen, but that's one thing. If that doesn't happen, you hope that the new GM, manager, and president are on the same page enough to deal with it and not have it be like, I want him, I don't. Just like, is he good? And Sandy will put in his 2 cents, which is positive about Hefner, and they'll figure it out. But he could be in some kind of coordinator or director role somewhere in the organization, in theory. And then he'd probably be out with another organization if it went that way after this next season. Go to be a pitching coach somewhere else, or they could commit to him as their guy and say, "Hey, this guy's good. We want him to be Bob Melvin's pitching coach," and that's just the way it is. So maybe Bob's like, "No, I want, so and so." These are the conversations that'll be happening.
So, the rest of the coaching staff that hasn't been hired yet after your reporting last week, manager included, are these things completely on hold until they hire somebody?
Pretty much. Yeah, it'd have to be. They clear the decks of the manager and coaches, and so out of respect to the new hire in a lot of ways. So yeah, they're not hiring. You could do your random, let's say like the most amazing coach becomes available you just there's no rules about how you would handle this, but there's a reason they had a reset button by getting rid of everybody, including some pretty good coaches. Give the next person some leeway.
Right. So speaking of which, our next topic is an interesting idea from Jeff, which is kind of examining the relationship between Sandy Alderson and Steve Cohen, not necessarily, interpersonal communications and that type, but more of, two big hires coming up, very different philosophies on life, but a partnership from the beginning that helped get Steve Cohen the team.
Yeah.
So what do you think, like, both of their roles will be in hiring somebody who's underneath both of them, but may be the most important decision maker in terms of player personnel for the next half decade or more?
It's a Cohen hire for sure. Alderson can make recommendations and help and bring candidates to Cohen, but it's Cohen's hire because this has got to be his partner in building the Mets for a long time to come. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a given that this person would be quote unquote under Sandy. An organization could have a flow chart where a president of baseball operations reports to the owner and a president of business reports to the owner. So it doesn't have to be that this person's under Sandy, actually. That's one of the things to work out. And that depends who it is. Maybe it's somebody who doesn't value Alderson's input, or maybe it's someone that wants him in the room. And that will be up to Steve Cohen and the new person with some input from Alderson.
That's really interesting to think of, these interviews potentially not even involving Sandy Alderson. And
I didn't say that, though. I'm just saying that.
No, but, if it's a Steve Cohen hire and this person may not be working under Sandy, that's all
Right.
I'm saying is like, he's not going to get the final input. He doesn't have final cut. And I think,
no, he does not.
Look, it's easy to forget that when Sandy was hired, this hire was the next thing on his to-do list was hiring a president of baseball ops. That didn't happen. And since then, because of Porter and Scott, he's become the GM a couple times. He's answered a lot of questions about players and injuries and stuff that he did not sign up for. It wasn't the job that he took. So again, and this is a reminder that we've both made on the podcast, he's going to be in charge of ticket sales stuff and promotions and community outreach and that's what a president of an organization does. It's a company. Right. And there's a lot of stuff that a company does other than play baseball games. So the person that is hired to do this new job will be in charge strictly of the baseball operations of the company.
That's right. And every organization has a bit of a different flow of how that works with the owner, with each other. It's kind of, that's the kind of thing that those people at the very top have to work out, both officially and then interpersonally. And it's just different for every team. I mean, the Mets have a more involved owner probably than many teams, if not most, and that's a variable. I heard that the Dodgers owner, the front man kind of for the Guggenheim Group, Mark Walter, speaks to Andrew Friedman once in a blue moon, whereas Cohen is talking to his baseball people all the time. So that's a different look, and that's something that I'll have to figure out. Like, is Cohen, when he's worried about the team in the morning after a bad game, is he calling the new guy? Is he calling Alderson? Is he calling the GM? It's all these things that they all have to sort out, and it depends who the person is, how that dynamic exactly works.
Just for the sake of making this make sense to me, I don't know if this will help our listeners. Was or is Randy Levine the president of the Yankees?
Yes, he's the team president. So in that structure, he is above Brian Cashman in that team's hierarchy.
But you never really bring up his name when they make a big move or a player decision, right?
He is not in baseball operations, but he has in the past become part of baseball operations, which is something he and Cashman have had to work out. This is how it's different for every organization. Like Randy Levine, A-Rod, and some Goldman Sachs guys basically did A-Rod's second deal after he opted out, and Cashman had nothing to do with it. Do you remember when Cashman ripped the Rafael Soriano deal. Like,
Yeah,
at the press conference.
I was about to bring that one up.
So there are times when he sticks his input in baseball operations, but technically that he's not in that department, but he is the president of the team. So they do work under him, but it doesn't have to be that way. You could have different flows. I believe the Rays have this where Eric Neander now is the head of baseball, president of baseball, reports to the owner, Stuart Sternberg. A guy named Matt Silverman is in charge of president of business operations. He reports to the owner, kind of on parallel tracks. I don't think Silverman is Neander's boss. Small chance I'm wrong about that, but you see what I mean? It's different everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, there's not much going on right now, but I think that's really good inside baseball and inside front office stuff that maybe people are thinking, why, is Sandy Alderson's job going to remain the same? And, what's his role going to be if they're hiring somebody to do what he's been doing? Well, clearly there's room for two. And a lot of times they coexist kind of separately, reporting to an owner. We'll see what their structure ends up looking like. One important decision that whoever they hire is going to have to deal with, Sandy's going to have to deal with, Steve Cohen's going to have to deal with, is Robinson Cano. And he's been coming up a little bit because, he's tweeting and Instagramming photos, working out. He's playing winter ball, I think. And it's a reminder that there's 2 years left on this very expensive contract. It's a reminder that even though he's been suspended twice for PEDs, that there are players in every clubhouse who truly don't care about that and see him, for example, as a leader. And, if you were to ask me, do the Rat and Raccoon and the Donnie Stevenson things happen if Cano's in that clubhouse? I don't know the answer to that.
That's a good question, though.
But what do you think? What do you think the Mets do with him? Is it as simple as, buying him out because they don't want the headache of dealing with his position on their roster? Or do you think that they see him as a potential useful piece?
I don't know yet. There's so many things that are more important to the team for them to think about first. I doubt that they've given it a ton of thought, and I bet that's an interview question for people. Like, what would you do with Cano? And somebody might say, let's cut him. Somebody might say, DH is coming to the league. See what he's got. What do we have to lose? Paying him anyway. So there could be some further discussion on that. And I think it's probably someone down the checklist.
It's such a interesting quandary that a president of baseball ops in an interview could say, I think bring him back. Look, he can hit. You got the DH coming. Maybe he plays a little bit of third base and he's a good leadership guy. And that feels like an indictment on the game, that the guy twice suspended for performance enhancing drugs is going to be a leader in your clubhouse. But at the same time,
go ahead.
That's just kind of the way life works. I mean, maybe Cano just communicates well with other players and is able to be a leader without saying to them, hey, here's how to take PEDs without getting caught, hopefully.
And guys do that. The whole biogenesis group, that's a topic of baseball leadership as it is. There's a tremendous gap, I was going to say, between how the public perceives the ethics of a lot of things that go on and how they're seen in a clubhouse. And sometimes it would be dispiriting to really think that through, but sometimes the media and public can be too judgmental and say like, oh, because you did this one bad thing, you can't be a leader in other ways. I don't know. It's like, if you look at what's going on right now in the with the guy, other than Beltran, the two managers that did something really bad with the Astros, Cora and Hinch, are both completely back in the good graces as if it never happened. I mean, Cano will be welcomed back into the clubhouse. There's always a few players that are really upset about PED use and they really care. Wrecker obviously is someone who really cares and judges Cano very harshly for that, and would if he was on the team, I'm sure. But that stuff is pretty much kept quiet, and it's probably the minority opinion. And the things that Cano brings to the table, like he's really good at being in the infield and helping to read swings and looking for pitch location and telling people where to go. He has like a captain of the infield thing that he does, which is good. But ethics don't really come into play with these discussions often.
And by the way, Rec is, very, as you said, very judgmental about PED use, but admits freely that he was charmed by Bartolo Colon for pretty much their entire career together. As with the pitcher and catcher relationship, loved him, thought he was great for their clubhouse, and was able to see past the PED use because it was like he was too much of a great teammate. And
right.
I loved his presence in our room.
Well, I understand that.
That happens. Yeah. And I get it too. So
you
anyway,
who wants to, I mean, we make such a big deal out of like how these teams and locker rooms gel, but if you think about your own workplace, there's people who you enjoy that if you were to start talking about politics or the way you raise your families or like whatever, you'd find some significant gaps or differences in some people, but you have a common purpose, which allows you to bond over that, even if temporarily. So same thing on a team, probably.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point. And this conversation about Robinson Cano got more philosophical than maybe I intended, but I appreciate it. A reminder, subscribe to the Shea Anything Podcast, wherever you're listening, Apple, Spotify, we appreciate it. And a reminder that Shea Anything is brought to you by Verizon. It's 5G built right for the Mets from the network. More people rely on only on Verizon. Andy, it's almost time for another snack. I know you probably are finished with yours.
Couple hours, actually. I'm actually going to Cat's Deli for a late lunch today because I haven't.
How about that?
So
pastrami on rye?
That's no snack. That's meal for days.
Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, everybody. We will probably talk to you next week.